Cutting out the lining is fairly straightforward, and I generally like to cut the lining out first. What you have here is the center back piece and the front. You can see I'm cutting it out of a rather busy paisley. Now I'm using this rather busy paisley so I don't have to worry about matching a pattern, because matching a pattern on a raglan sleeve is a bit of a challenge. So I will cut these two pieces here, then lay out the sleeve and cut that. And now you can see I have the sleeve linings laid out. I will go off camera and cut those out, and you'll get to see the results. Now before I continue, I would like to talk a moment about the cutting tools. I have the rotary cutter. I also have my Gienger shears. I like to spread my cutting out between the two. I don't use the shears or the rotary cutter exclusively. This way I feel that you can avoid any repetitive stress injuries in your sewing. I think this is a really good consideration at this point. So be kind to your hands. Have multiple ways of cutting. This is the lining for the cuff latch. Now on the cuff latch, you either cut it along the grain or you cut it across the grain. That is up to you. I'll talk about that when we cut the one in face fabric. But I like to cut the lining on the bias. I find it's far easier to turn this right side out when you cut the lining on the bias. And this is the pocket bag. You could cut it out of the lining fabric, you could cut it out of pocketing, but we cut two of these because front and back, the way we set the welt pockets, this will create one whole pocket. So the straight of grain is right here, and I will cut this out with my rotary cutter. Now on to marking. The first thing I want to mark is the shoulder dart on the lining sleeve. Now, this is a pretty straightforward thing to do. You just use your tracing carbon and your tracing wheel. Now, debates rage about using the tracing carbon. Some people try to slip it between the layers, have the right sides out. I like the right sides together, so it's far easier to have one laying on the table facing up. Then you have the two layers of fabric. You have the carbon facing down, and then the pattern on top. And that is the easy way to go. Now another little marking thing here. This is what's called a dual tracing wheel. It's metric. We're not going to be using it for this, but they adjust, as you can see. You can adjust the widths, and then you put one finger here, so you can have one tracing wheel on the stitching line, and then the other one will make the cutting line. Now if you want to use one, don't just take this off and set it aside, because it will end up in the trash and you don't want to lose it. I just turn them like so. Now my students, sometimes when they're shipped like this. So the students ask, okay, what's up with that? And I have to tell them, okay, you take them out and you turn them. So yes, now I like the ones with the blunt ribs as opposed to the needles. Doesn't damage the fabric so much. Okay, now that we've marked the shoulder, this is where we just come in with the scissors and make any snips that we need to make. In the seam allowances, and that's marking the sleeve. The only thing really to mark on the front is the snips at the armhole. You can also mark a snip on the side to match it up, and I just will make a snip here where I folded so you can match this up to the back. The front is ready to go. Here is the lining back. So make one snip at the center back, and we make 2 snips. As a rule, 2 snips are on the back, 1 snip is on the front. 1 mark here, and 1 mark here. So there you have it. These are the back pieces. Next, the pocket. We just want to know where this fold line is on the pocket. So it's a simple matter of 2 snips. Fairly easy. And the lining on the cuff latch, don't really need any marks. That will take care of itself. So we have all of the marking and cutting done for the lining. Next will be the face fabric. This is the fabric that I'm going to be using for the demonstrator coat. This is a boucle. As you can see, it has a little metallic in it. So it's kind of pretty. But what you notice is that I have block fused it on the back. Now, this is not absolutely necessary, but what I wanted to do is to block fuse it so that you could tell the right side from the wrong side during the videos. So what I have done here is I have laid everything out. This is 3.5 yards of fabric at 54 inches wide. You notice I've got a little bit left over, which is better, just in case you have a boo-boo. So let me unfold this and I'll show you the layout. What you see here, there's one of the sleeves, there's the other sleeve, this is the back. I'm orienting everything in one direction. This fabric, I'm not really sure whether it has a nap or not, but I've decided to orient everything in the same direction just so that there is no change of the surface texture when the garment is being worn. This is what's called a nap layout. The other option would be what's called a nested layout, where you turn all the pieces so that you can get a higher yield. That works for solid fabrics and tweeds and such, but for this particular fabric, I've decided to go with a nap layout. And here are the rest of the pieces. You have the undercollar piece cut on the bias. You have the upper collar cut center back on fold. This is the body front. This is the facing for the front. And then down here, I'm actually going to turn this. This is going to be the back neck facing. So these are the pieces that you cut from your face fabric. I will cut these out and then we will cover some marking. And one final piece. This is the cuff latch, and if you remember, we cut it on the bias in the lining. The straight of grain here, you could run it straight of grain, but I've decided to run it cross grain so that when it lays onto the sleeve, the texture will be the same. From here, we have our pieces of the face fabric. Next, we want to cut the tailoring canvas and the muslin. And finally, we cut the undercollar out of a thin muslin and out of the tailoring canvas. I will go off camera, cut these two out, and bring you back the results. So here we are. We have the undercollar cut from the face fabric, the muslin, and now the canvas. Now, as you can see, save this out with the pocket welt guide. You don't have to cut this out just yet, but keep these two together because you will need those later. All of our cutting is done. So to recap what we have done, we've cut out the lining pieces from the lining fabric. We've cut out the face fabric pieces from the face fabric. We've also cut the undercollar from muslin and tailoring canvas, and we've saved out the welt guide with the tailoring canvas. So we have all of our pieces cut, ready for marking. Now that we have everything cut out, aside from marking clips on the notches, there are a couple things that I want to mark. Pocket placement and also center front and the button placement. Now a little note here. What I've done, I've worked ahead, and since I altered this here, I needed to redistribute the spacing for the buttons. So that's what I would say is don't forget to do that. You could actually just wait until you have the buttonholes made, but you know, it's just good to look at it in the pattern. I like everything back to the pattern as best I can. So the first thing I want to do is make tailor tacks. Now some people sew through the paper. I don't encourage that. So what you can see here, I've poked, or punched actually, holes. And I've used the eyelet punch from my buttonhole chisel. So I have a nice round hole. And I'm going to show you how I like to mark tailor tacks, which is maybe the same as you do it, maybe a little different, but I'd like to cover it here. I will use this one at the edge because it's just a little easier to access for the video. So what I want to do, I'm using, it's a Gutermann thread, Gutermann Mara 30. I like that because it has a little bit of heft to it. You can use really whatever basting thread you choose. I like a double strand. So then I'm going to stitch down and then up right next to it. And then I want a little spacer. I just find this makes it a little easier to make the loops consistent. So you stitch in, you bring the needle back out. Notice we're not going through the paper, we're just going through the little hole. And it's a little easier if I'm not looking through the camera, but there we are. And again, stitch back in. And one more. And I'll show you how this works. Okay. So I have, there we are. Slide that out. And so then, see, the nice thing is you can get this, you don't have to worry about tearing up your pattern. And ultimately, when you separate the fabric later, you just come in here, snip those, cut the threads. There you have your tailor tacks. So now I will work ahead and mark all of the buttonholes and the matching notches for the welt pocket, and bring it back here because next we want to mark the center front line. So now we have all of the tailor tacks in. The next thing that we want to do is mark the center front. Now some people stitch through the paper. I'm not a big fan of that. So this is a fairly easy thing to do. So we're going to fold the paper on the center front. Then I'm going to show you, it's a variation of thread tracing. So with the thread tracing, we're going to be using the same Mara 30, and I'm going to start a little above this buttonhole here. And the easiest way to remember it is you stitch twice, you leave a loop. And then as we go along the cut edge of the paper, we make a stitch that lays flat. And a loop. Next, flat and a loop. There's a different way I'll show you in a moment, but this is essentially what we're doing. One stitch is flat and one stitch creates the loop. Flat and the loop. So this is what it looks like. You have flat, loop, flat, loop, flat, loop. Now, there's another way if you're feeling very frisky and adventurous. You can get 2 stitches in one pass. So this, we have the loop here, flat, so now the thread is flat. Now this, watch very carefully. Take one stitch and another stitch. This is where having a long needle is going to be helpful. And then you leave the loop. So you have a loop and a flat all in one. So let's just do that again. One stitch, another stitch. So it creates the same thing. So you can choose to do it the first way, which is a loop and a flat stitch, which is a little easier to remember. Or you could do it, you have your flat stitch here, take one stitch which is going to create the loop, and the next stitch which is going to create the flat stitch. 2 different ways of making the thread tracing. Now, I'm going to zoom out a little bit so you can see. So here you have a loop and a flat stitch. I will continue off camera and finish the rest of this and bring it back to show you the results. So here we are. We have all of the thread tracing sewn. Now I'm going to show you how this works. It's kind of like magic. Pry the fabric apart and cut down the center. Now, this is a little memory trick. If you're working on a fabric that the front and the back side look the same, I have this fused so you can tell back from front, but some fabrics is a little bit unclear. How I remember this, the face has the whiskers. So if you have a fabric where you can't tell front from back, you look for the whiskers. On the back, it's going to look like this on one side it will look like this on the other side, but there's no whiskers. And that's how I remember the face has the whiskers. I will go and open the rest of this and bring it back and show you the result. So we have all of our marking done. And when I put the pockets in, I will open up the tailor tacks on the pocket. So we have our cutting, we have our marking done. Now we get to start construction. But before we start construction, I would like to recap marking. On the lining, aside from making the snips for the matching notches in the seam allowances, really the only marking we want to do is the shoulder dart on the sleeve. On the main garment, you want to have tailor tacks for the buttonholes, tailor tacks for the pocket placement, and thread tracing for the center fronts. Make sure not to stint on marking. It will make your life so much easier later. So now, let's start making this coat.